Please subscribe and like.
Marcus Carter stepped onto the plane, adjusting his tailored suit as he made his way to first class. He had flown countless times before, but he always braced himself for that moment. The moment someone assumed he didn't belong. And sure enough, it happened. "Excuse me, sir." A sharp voice cut through the air. Marcus turned to see a blonde stewardess, Claire Reynolds, blocking his way. Her expression was polite, but her eyes held something else. Suspicion. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, eyeing his boarding pass as if he had stolen it. Marcus didn't flinch. He had seen this before, white passengers breezing past without question. But when it was him, suddenly, there was a problem. He held up his ticket. "First class, seat 3A. Claire blinked, her lips pressing into a thin line. There was no mistake. But instead of apologizing, she forced a stiff smile. "Oh, right. Well, go ahead. No welcome. No warmth." Marcus just nodded and walked past her, settling into his seat. As passengers continued to board, Marcus noticed how Claire treated everyone else. The older white businessman in 2A got a cheerful, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Simmons." The young white couple behind him received a bright, "Let me know if you need anything at all." But when Marcus asked for a glass of water, a sigh, a slow turn, a begrudging, "I'll get to it when I can," he didn't react. He never did, because he knew the moment he pushed back, he would become the problem. So he let it go. But he couldn't help but wonder, if he were white, would she have treated him the same? Across the aisle, an elderly white woman narrowed her eyes as she observed the interaction. A younger black man sitting toward the back noticed, too. They exchanged a glance but said nothing. Because they knew. Everyone always knew. But knowing wasn't enough. No one ever spoke up. And Claire? She carried on, oblivious to the lesson she was about to learn. The plane had leveled off at cruising altitude. Marcus sat quietly, reading a book, doing what he always did, minding his business. But Claire Reynolds couldn't seem to do the same. As she moved through first class, offering refills and warm smiles to every white passenger, she continued to act as if Marcus barely existed. When she finally reached his row, her tone was clipped. "Do you need anything else?" Marcus glanced up. The way she said it, it wasn't a polite offer. It was an obligation, a chore she was eager to be done with. He gave her a cool, knowing look. "No, I'm fine." Claire barely nodded before turning away. A white man across the aisle flagged her down, asking for an extra pillow. Instantly, her whole demeanor changed. "Of course, sir. Let me grab that for you right away." Marcus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Same flight. Same seats. But two completely different experiences. "Unbelievable," a voice murmured. Marcus turned slightly to see the elderly white woman from before, watching Claire's behavior with a frown. Her eyes met Marcus, and for a brief moment, there was something unspoken between them. She saw it. She knew. And unlike most, she didn't pretend not to. Claire, completely unaware, continued about her duties. To her, Marcus was just another black man she could dismiss. Just another seat to serve. She had no idea that soon she'd be the one needing his help. The first sign of trouble was the turbulence. It started as a few light bumps, nothing unusual. But then the plane jolted hard. Passengers gasped as drinks spilled and overhead compartments rattled. Claire's fake, customer service smile faltered. She steadied herself, glancing around as nervous murmurs filled the cabin. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Claire exhaled, relieved. Nothing serious. Just a little rough air. But seconds later, a new voice crackled over the intercom, urgent, shaky. "This is the co-pilot. We have a medical emergency." The cabin went dead silent. Claire's stomach dropped. She rushed toward the cockpit only to be stopped by the first officer, his face pale. "The captain, he's unconscious," he whispered. "I think it's a heart attack." Claire's breath hitched. "What?" The first officer looked terrified. "I need help. I can't land this plane alone." The words sent a wave of fear through her. They were over 30,000 feet in the air and their captain was incapacitated. If no one helped, this flight could end in disaster. Claire turned back toward the passengers, scanning the crowd. Her voice shook. "Does anyone here have flight experience?" Silence. No one moved. Claire's heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. And then, a deep, calm voice broke the silence. "I can help." She turned and her stomach sank. Because the man who had spoken was Marcus Carter. The very man she had dismissed, ignored, and looked down on. And now he was her only hope. For the first time since the flight began, Claire was speechless. She stared at Marcus, her mind scrambling. Him? The man she had treated like he didn't belong? The man she had brushed off, ignored, belittled? Now he was the only one stepping forward. She blurted out before she could stop herself. Marcus didn't flinch. Yes. I'm a former Air Force pilot. The cabin filled with whispers. Passengers exchanged looks, some surprised, others expectant. Even the elderly woman who had been watching everything gave Claire a knowing glance. The first officer hesitated for only a moment before making the call. Come with me. Marcus didn't wait for permission. He unbuckled his seatbelt and strode toward the cockpit. Claire instinctively moved to block his path, then realized how ridiculous that would be. Instead, she stepped aside, face burning. As Marcus disappeared into the cockpit, Claire's pulse raced. The realization hit her like a brick. He had been right in front of me this whole time. And I treated him like he didn't belong. Her stomach twisted. Now everything was flipped. The man she had looked down on was the one person who could save her. And there was nothing she could do about it. She swallowed hard and turned back to the passengers. Everyone remained calm, she stammered, her confidence rattled. We're in good hands. But as she spoke, she knew she wasn't just talking about the flight. She was talking about Marcus Carter. Inside the cockpit, Marcus Carter moved with quiet confidence. The first officer looked shaken, his hands gripping the controls, but Marcus remained steady. What's our current altitude? He asked. 34,000 feet, the first officer stammered. We were preparing for descent when the captain, he glanced at the slumped-over pilot, his breathing shallow. Marcus nodded. All right, we'll take it step by step. Without hesitation, he took the co-pilot's seat and adjusted the controls like second nature. Years of training, countless hours in the air, this was what he had been built for. Outside the cockpit, the passengers sat in tense silence. Claire stood frozen near the curtain, her fingers gripping the fabric. Every second that passed only deepened the weight in her chest. She had spent the entire flight dismissing Marcus, treating him as if he didn't belong. Now he was sitting in the captain's seat, holding the lives of everyone in his hands, including hers. A lump formed in her throat. Then the first officer's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an experienced pilot assisting us. Please remain seated as we begin our emergency landing. Relief rippled through the cabin, but Claire barely heard it. All she could do was watch as the man she had belittled just did his job without arrogance, without hesitation. And he was about to save them all. The plane trembled as it began its emergency descent. The cabin was eerily silent. No one dared to speak, barely even breathed. All eyes were on the front, where Marcus Carter was guiding the aircraft through the most dangerous part of the flight. Claire stood near the cockpit door, feeling completely powerless. She had spent the entire flight treating Marcus like an outsider, like someone who didn't deserve to be in first class. And now her life was in his hands. Inside the cockpit, Marcus remained composed. Flaps down, he instructed. The first officer followed his lead, trusting him without question. As the runway came into view, Marcus made the final adjustments. Brace for landing, he announced over the intercom, his voice calm and steady. Claire instinctively gripped the nearest seat as the wheels touched the ground. Smooth, controlled, perfect. A second later, the plane slowed to a stop. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, thunderous applause. Passengers cheered. Some even cried. Relief swept through the cabin like a wave. And Claire? She just stood there, stunned. As Marcus emerged from the cockpit, passengers reached out to shake his hand, pat him on the back, thank him for saving their lives. Claire swallowed hard as he approached her. Their eyes met. She had spent hours dismissing him, looking down on him. And now she had no words. But Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just gave her a small, knowing nod before walking past her. And that made it worse, because it meant he already knew who she was before she did. The passengers poured out of the plane, some still shaken, others rushing to thank Marcus again. The flight crew stood near the exit, offering nervous smiles as people departed. Claire Reynolds lingered near the doorway, watching as Marcus calmly collected his bag. He wasn't looking for attention, wasn't expecting praise. He had done his job, nothing more, nothing less. But for Claire, it was everything. As Marcus reached the exit, she finally spoke. "Mr. Carter," she started, her voice hesitant. He turned, raising an eyebrow. She swallowed. I misjudged you." Marcus let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "You did." Claire's face burned. She had expected him to brush it off, to say it's okay. But why should he? She had looked at him and seen less. And yet, when her life was on the line, he hadn't hesitated to save her. "I'm sorry," she added quickly. Marcus studied her for a beat, then gave a slow nod. "Maybe next time you won't judge so quickly." And with that he walked away, disappearing into the airport crowd. Claire stood frozen as passengers filed past her. She had learned something today, something uncomfortable. Marcus Carter hadn't just saved her life. He had exposed her. And now she would have to live with that truth.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like.